Welcome to Top 10 Secret Channel. Today, we will take you on a terrifying journey through the top 10 most haunting stories of the Hell Riders, ghostly figures mounted on fiery steeds, roaming the night in pursuit of damned souls, where the echoes of their hoofbeats from the underworld will send shivers down your spine. Brace yourself, for this is not for the faint of heart. Story 1. The Graveyard Rider. A tale of eternal terror. In the heart of the forsaken Blackthorn Hollow, a shadow loomed over the crumbling village of Ravenmoor. Long abandoned and overrun by nature's relentless grip, the village bore the scars of an ancient curse that defied time. Above it all, the graveyard sprawled across a hilltop, a labyrinth of cracked headstones and rusted iron gates. Beneath the light of a skull-shaped moon, an otherworldly rider emerged, a figure whose legend was whispered across generations. The Graveyard Rider. To see him was to meet death. His crimson eyes burned like embers, his skeletal horse exhaling clouds of frost. Behind him, an aura of dread spilled through the cemetery's twisted paths, accompanied by the mournful toll of an unseen bell. Some said his arrival was heralded by whispers from the graves. Others claimed he rode to collect the souls of those who had betrayed the dead. Centuries ago, Ravenmoor was a prosperous village, flourishing under the shade of Blackthorn Forest. The village was known for its bustling marketplace, where merchants sold goods crafted with care and precision. Festivals were a regular occurrence, with villagers gathering to dance, feast, and light lanterns that floated into the night sky as offerings to the spirits. Children played in the open fields, their laughter ringing out as they wove garlands of wildflowers, while the elders shared stories of their ancestors around crackling fires. At the heart of their traditions was the cemetery, a sacred place where the living honored the dead with weekly rituals, leaving food and gifts at the graves to ensure harmony between the realms. Life in Ravenmoor was simple yet rich, filled with a profound respect for the land and its history, a stark contrast to the shadow that would soon envelop it. Its lifeblood was its cemetery, a sacred resting place for the departed, guarded by rites older than memory. The villagers believed that their dead protected the living, and for generations, they honored this bond with prayers, offerings, and celebrations of remembrance. The balance was broken when Lord Edric, a greedy nobleman, arrived. Desperate to expand his wealth, Edric demanded the villagers turn over their cemetery land to build his sprawling manor. His plans involved tearing down the sacred headstones, digging up graves, and replacing them with polished stone and opulent gardens. When the villagers refused, Edric's men raided the cemetery at night, desecrating graves and scattering remains. Father Aldrich, the village's priest, warned Edric of dire consequences. "You cannot disturb the sanctity of the dead without invoking their wrath," he said, his voice trembling with conviction. But Edric, arrogant and unyielding, dismissed the warning. He mocked the villagers' fears, calling their sacred rites nothing more than primitive superstition. Determined to assert his dominance, he commanded his men to tear down the headstones and scatter the remains of the dead, proclaiming that he would transform the wretched plot of land into a symbol of his grandeur. His desecration went further still. The tomb of the village's founder was opened, its contents discarded without ceremony, and the ancient blackthorn trees surrounding the cemetery were cut down to make way for his lavish gardens. Each act of destruction was met with silent protests from the villagers, their fear of reprisal outweighing their anger as they watched their ancestors' resting place defiled for the sake of Edric's vanity. On the night of the first full moon after the graves were disturbed, a violent storm swept through Ravenmoor. Lightning illuminated the desecrated cemetery, where the disturbed earth bled a dark, viscous liquid. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the village. "You have defiled the dead. Now the living shall pay." Edric was the first to fall. As he celebrated his triumph in the grand hall of his partially built manor, the graveyard rider emerged from the mist. Clad in a tattered cloak, his skeletal horse exhaled plumes of frost with each step. The villagers who saw him that night spoke of his sword, wreathed in ghostly flames, and the crimson eyes that pierced the darkness. Edric's laughter turned to screams as the rider burst into the hall, shattering the heavy oak doors as if they were paper. The nobleman's guards fled in terror, their weapons useless against the spectral figure. The rider raised his sword, and with a single swipe, Edric's body crumpled to the ground. A glowing red light rose from his chest, his soul, and was drawn into the rider's blade. The villagers believed that Edric's death would appease the curse, but they were gravely mistaken. The rider returned each full moon, his victims chosen from those who had aided in desecrating the graves or turned a blind eye to Edric's greed. His presence became a harbinger of doom, and soon, Ravenmoor's streets grew silent as fear consumed the village. Years passed, and Ravenmoor became a shadow of its former self. Homes were abandoned, their windows boarded up, and the few remaining villagers lived in constant terror. They locked their doors and lit candles on nights of the full moon, praying that the rider would pass them by. Among those who remained was Elena, a young woman who had grown up hearing the tales of the rider. Unlike the others, Elena believed the curse could be broken. She had discovered an old journal hidden in the church, written by Father Aldrich before his mysterious disappearance. The journal revealed a ritual that could banish the rider, but it required unimaginable courage and sacrifice. Elena's family had been among those who aided Edric in his desecration, and she carried the guilt of her ancestors. Her grandfather had been one of the laborers who uprooted graves, believing the promise of wealth would protect their future. Over the years, this legacy weighed heavily on her family, manifesting in whispered arguments behind closed doors and an unspoken shame that clung to their name. Her father, though innocent of the original sin, often spoke of their responsibility to right the wrongs of the past, planting wildflowers at the cemetery's edge as a futile gesture of penance. These stories, passed down like a dark heirloom, instilled in Elena a deep sense of duty. It was this burden that compelled her to confront the rider, even as fear gnawed at her resolve, for she knew that without action, the curse would forever haunt the bloodline she sought to redeem. Determined to end the suffering, she prepared herself for the ritual. On the night of the full moon, she gathered the required items: a lantern, an iron cross, and a vial of consecrated water. With these in hand, she made her way to the cemetery. The path to the graveyard was overgrown, the once pristine cobblestones cracked and slick with moss. As Elena approached the gates, the air grew colder and the mist thickened, swirling around her feet like grasping hands. The toll of the phantom bell echoed through the night, growing louder with each step she took. Inside the cemetery, the graves seemed to shift in the moonlight, their shadows dancing unnaturally. The air was thick and cloying, carrying the faint metallic tang of decay mixed with the damp musk of rotting leaves. A low hum, almost imperceptible, seemed to emanate from the earth itself, growing louder with each step Elena took. Every so often, a soft rustle broke the silence, as if unseen figures moved just beyond her line of sight. The skeletal branches of the blackthorn trees creaked ominously, their twisted forms appearing almost alive in the eerie glow. Beneath it all was an unsettling silence, broken only by the faint whisper of voices that seemed to rise from the graves, their words just out of reach, tugging at the edges of her sanity. The skeletal branches of the blackthorn trees twisted toward her, as if warning her to turn back. But Elena pressed on, her grip tightening on the iron cross. At the heart of the cemetery, beneath a gnarled tree whose roots sprawled like veins across the ground, the rider awaited. His skeletal horse pawed at the earth, its breath visible in the frigid air. The rider dismounted, his cloak billowing as though caught in a wind only he could feel. crimson eyes locked onto Elena, and his voice echoed like thunder. "You dare enter my domain?" he growled. "Your blood will feed the roots of this cursed ground." Elena began the ritual, reciting the incantations from Father Aldrich's journal. The air around her grew heavy, and the whispers of the dead rose to a deafening chorus. The rider raised his sword, advancing toward her. But as he struck, she cast the consecrated water onto the ground. A blinding light erupted from the earth, halting the rider in his tracks. "You cannot break the bond," he roared. "The curse is eternal." Elena raised the iron cross, its surface glowing with an otherworldly energy. "I offer my soul," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Take me and let the dead rest." The rider hesitated, his crimson eyes flickering. For a moment, the whispers ceased, and the cemetery fell silent. Then, with a howl of fury, the rider plunged his sword into the ground. The earth trembled, and a column of light engulfed them both. When the light faded, the cemetery was quiet. The skull-shaped moon had disappeared, replaced by a sky filled with stars. The rider was gone, and the cemetery's oppressive aura had lifted. The villagers emerged from their homes, their faces filled with hope and disbelief. At the base of the gnarled tree, they found Elena's lantern, its flame still flickering, and the iron cross, now blackened and cracked. They buried the cross beneath the tree as a memorial to her bravery, believing she had ended the curse. But Ravenmoor's shadows were not so easily silenced. On stormy nights, travelers spoke of hearing the toll of a distant bell and the faint glow of lanterns in the cemetery. One merchant passing near Blackthorn Hollow claimed to have seen a spectral horseman standing motionless at the gates, his crimson eyes staring through the mist as though waiting for someone. A group of hunters spoke of encountering a trail of frost-covered hoofprints that led them in circles until dawn. Another tale came from a widow who sought to leave an offering at the cemetery. She swore she saw the rider beneath the gnarled tree, whispering her husband's name in a voice that chilled her to the core. These accounts, shared in hushed tones at taverns miles away from Ravenmoor, only deepened the fear surrounding the rider and ensured that none dared approach the cursed cemetery. Some claimed to see a cloaked figure on a skeletal horse, his eyes burning less brightly but still watching, waiting. Whether the rider's curse was truly broken or merely dormant, none dared to test their luck by walking the cemetery paths after dark. Story 2: The Broken Veil. A tale of beauty and decay. In a forgotten corner of the world, nestled deep within a forest shrouded in perpetual twilight, lay the ruins of Velmorn, a village long abandoned to the whispers of time. The air in Velmorn carried a sense of unease, as if the forest itself mourned the lives that had once thrived there. Crumbling walls overrun with vines and moss stood as silent witnesses to the horrors that had unfolded, while a path, worn smooth by centuries of hesitant steps, led to the heart of the village's tragedy, a place the locals called the Fractured Grove. Here, beneath a gnarled, blackened tree, the legend of the Broken Veil was born. Centuries ago, Velmorn was a flourishing village, known for its vibrant artistry and harmonious way of life. Its people were craftsmen and dreamers, their work inspired by the ethereal beauty of the surrounding forest. At the center of their lives was Liana, the village priestess, a woman so captivating that poets traveled from distant lands to immortalize her in verse. Her beauty was not merely skin deep. She was a beacon of compassion, a healer of bodies and souls. Her touch brought comfort to the sick, and her voice, soft as a lullaby, calmed even the most restless hearts. Liana's sanctuary was a modest temple built beneath the sprawling branches of the village's sacred tree. Here, she performed rituals to honor the forest spirits, ensuring the village's prosperity. But Velmorn's golden age was not to last. A creeping darkness descended upon the village. Crops began to fail, livestock perished without cause, and a wasting sickness spread among the people. The forest, once a source of inspiration and life, seemed to turn against them, its shadows growing longer and its whispers more menacing. Desperate to save her people, Lyanna sought answers in the village's ancient texts. Hidden in the temple's depths, she found a tome bound in blackened leather, its pages filled with symbols that seemed to writhe under her gaze. The book spoke of an entity known as the Harbinger, a being that could grant unimaginable power and prosperity. For a price. Lyanna hesitated, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was about to unleash. Her mind raced with memories of her village, children laughing as they played in the fields, elders telling stories by the firelight, and the scent of fresh bread wafting from the communal ovens. She thought of the faces of those who depended on her, now hollowed by hunger and despair. Yet a darker memory clawed at her resolve. The day she had knelt beside a dying boy, his mother's cries piercing the air as Lyanna's remedies failed to save him. The guilt of her inability to protect them all burned in her chest, mingling with the fear of failure. As she stared at the ancient tome, its symbols twisting unnaturally on the page, she whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for her people, and stepped over the threshold into darkness. But as she looked upon the hollowed faces of her people, their hope dwindling with each passing day, she made her choice. On a moonless night, Lyanna performed the ritual described in the tome. Beneath the sacred tree, she spilled her own blood onto the roots, reciting incantations that twisted the air around her. The Harbinger appeared as a towering figure cloaked in shifting shadows, its form shifting and rippling like smoke caught in a tempest. Its edges bled into the surrounding darkness, making it impossible to determine where its body ended and the shadows began. Its presence carried an oppressive weight, as though the air itself recoiled from it. Glowing eyes, scattered across its amorphous form like embers in a dying fire, burned with a sinister intelligence. A faint, otherworldly hum accompanied its every movement, resonating in Lyanna's chest like a low, bone-rattling growl. The air around it grew cold and damp, thick with the metallic scent of blood, and its whispers echoed in her mind, 1,000 voices speaking in unison, promising salvation wrapped in despair. Its voice was a cacophony of whispers, promising salvation in exchange for loyalty and sacrifice. Lyanna agreed, vowing to serve the entity if it would spare her village. At first, the pact seemed to work. The crops flourished, the sickness vanished, and the villagers praised Lyanna for her devotion. But the Harbinger's demands grew darker. It required offerings, first animals, then people. Lyanna chose her sacrifices carefully, selecting the outcast and the forgotten, those whose absence would cause the least pain. Each offering strengthened the village but chipped away at Lyanna's soul. Her beauty, once radiant, became almost inhuman, her features too perfect, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Then came Elias, a young artist who arrived in Velmorn seeking inspiration. He was captivated by Lyanna, not for her beauty, but for the sadness he saw in her. Elias painted her portrait, a masterpiece that seemed to capture her very essence. For the first time, Lyanna felt seen, not as a savior or a monster, but as a woman. She fell in love, and for a brief moment, she believed she could escape the shadows that bound her. Lyanna's love for Elias made her reckless. She sought to break her pact with the Harbinger, hoping to reclaim her humanity. But the Harbinger, sensing her defiance, descended upon the village in a storm of shadow and flame. It cursed her to an existence between life and death. Her visage split in two. One half as radiant as the day she made the pact, the other a decaying skull, a mockery of the beauty she had once cherished. The villagers, horrified by her transformation, turned against her. Their fear quickly twisted into anger as they struggled to justify their betrayal of the woman they had once revered. "She is no longer our priestess," one elder cried, his voice trembling with fear. "She is a monster, a blight upon our village." Mothers shielded their children from Lyanna's gaze, while men armed themselves with crude weapons, their hands shaking as they gripped axes and torches. "It is her beauty that cursed us," another villager shouted, his face contorted with rage. "We must burn her and cleanse Velmorn of her taint." Amidst the chaos, some wept silently, too afraid to intervene but too guilt-ridden to look away. The mob dragged Lyanna to the sacred tree, their chants of condemnation mingling with their own guilt and terror, as if drowning out her cries would absolve them of the dark truth. They had turned on their savior to save themselves. They dragged her to the sacred tree and bound her to its trunk. As they lit the fire beneath her, Lyanna's voice rose above the crackling flames. "You think you can destroy me? This curse will not end with my death. I will rise again, and your blood will feed the roots of this tree." Her words proved true. Over the years, the sacred tree withered into a gnarled monstrosity, its bark blackened and its roots twisting like claws. The villagers abandoned Velmorn, leaving behind only the legend of the broken veil. For generations, travelers avoided the ruins of Velmorn. Those who ventured too close spoke of a voice calling to them from the shadows, a woman's voice both alluring and menacing. Some claimed to see her beneath the tree, her fractured face illuminated by an otherworldly glow. Her whispers promised power, beauty, and answers to their deepest desires. But those who listened too closely never returned. One chilling tale told of a merchant who, desperate to save his dying daughter, sought out the broken veil. He was found days later, his body contorted and his face frozen in terror, clutching a withered flower that crumbled to ash in the sunlight. Centuries after Lyanna's death, a young artist named Mira arrived in Velmorna. She was a descendant of Elias, though she knew little of her ancestors' connection to the cursed village. Mira had heard rumors of the broken veil and hoped to find inspiration in the ruins. As she wandered through the crumbling village, she felt an inexplicable pull toward the forest. The path to the sacred tree was overgrown, yet Mira found her way with unsettling ease. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to whisper her name. When she reached the clearing, she saw Lyanna's spirit for the first time. Half of her face was radiant, the other a skeletal grin that seemed to mock Mira's fear. "You carry his blood," Lyanna said, her voice a chilling echo. "The one who painted me, the one who doomed me." Lyanna revealed that her curse could be undone, but only by one of Elias's bloodline. She had uncovered this truth in the fragments of the tome she had used to forge her pact, its cursed pages revealing their secrets only after decades of torment. Each word etched itself into her mind like a scar, their meaning both a beacon of hope and a dagger of guilt. Lyanna's voice trembled as she explained this to Mira, her fractured face reflecting both desperation and sorrow. "I carry the burden of what I've done," she said, her skeletal grin twisting into something resembling anguish. "To place this weight upon you is a cruelty I can hardly bear, but without your hand, the curse will consume us both forever." Mira would need to paint her likeness once more, capturing both her beauty and her decay, and offer the painting to the Harbinger as an act of penance. The task would be perilous, for the Harbinger would not relinquish its hold easily. Mira agreed, setting up her easel beneath the cursed tree. As she painted, the forest seemed to close in around her, shadows moving in unnatural ways. The air grew heavy, and a deep, guttural growl echoed through the clearing. The Harbinger appeared, its form a mass of shifting shadows and glowing eyes. It demanded Mira stop, its voice a thunderous roar that shook the ground. But Mira continued, her brush strokes defying the terror that gripped her. When the painting was complete, the forest erupted in chaos. The harbinger let out a deafening scream as the sacred tree began to wither, its roots retracting into the earth. Leanna's spirit dissolved into a cascade of light, her fractured face finally whole. The painting glowed with an ethereal light, banishing the harbinger back into the void. When the light faded, Mira was alone in the clearing. The cursed tree was gone, replaced by a circle of wildflowers that seemed to hum with life. The painting lay at her feet, its canvas blank as though it had never been touched. Mira returned to her home, carrying the weight of Leanna's story and the knowledge that her actions had ended a centuries-old curse. But Velmorn's shadows were not so easily silenced. On stormy nights, travelers claimed to hear whispers in the forest, a woman's voice promising beauty and power. One hunter spoke of a chilling encounter where he saw faint lights weaving through the trees, like ghostly lanterns leading him deeper into the woods. Another tale told of a young merchant who ventured into the ruins seeking treasure, only to stumble upon a woman's shadow stretching impossibly tall against the trunks of ancient oaks. He swore he heard her voice, sorrowful yet commanding, asking him to reveal his greatest desire. When he refused to answer, he was found days later at the forest's edge, his hair turned white and his eyes hollow. Others spoke of fleeting glimpses of her fractured face in the reflections of puddles, her skeletal grin twisting as if to mock their terror. These stories, whispered by those brave or foolish enough to pass near Velmorn, only deepened the legend's grip on those who dared to listen. And in the heart of the wildflowers, some swore they saw a face, half beautiful, half decayed, watching, waiting. Story 3. The Lady of the Veil, a tale of vengeance and eternal terror. In the frost-bitten expanse of Caldwin Hollow, where the jagged peaks of the Blackspire Mountains cut into an eternally gray sky, a shadow loomed over the land. The hollow had long since been abandoned, its once thriving villages now buried beneath layers of snow and ice. Yet whispers of its dark guardian lingered in taverns and travelers' tales. The legend of the Lady of the Veil. Clad in flowing black robes and adorned with intricate bone jewelry, her skeletal visage haunted the dreams of those who dared approach her domain. Her eyes, hollow yet alive with an eerie glow, were said to see through a person's soul, revealing their deepest fears and darkest secrets. To meet her was to face judgment, and very few lived to tell the tale. Long ago, Caldwin Hollow was a prosperous region, a patchwork of small villages nestled at the base of the Blackspire Mountains. Among them, the largest and most notable was Elyrith, governed by Lady Elise Valamont, a noblewoman revered for her wisdom and beauty. Her silver hair and calm demeanor earned her the title the Moonlight Lady among her people, and she was as beloved as she was respected. Elise was no ordinary ruler. Known for her knowledge of ancient rites and mountain lore, she acted as both protector and spiritual guide. It was said that on the eve of every winter solstice, Elise would climb Blackspire Summit alone, bearing offerings of silver and incense to commune with the spirits of the peaks. These rituals, carried out in sacred silence, were believed to ensure bountiful harvests and mild winters for her people. Legends spoke of how she could summon the winds to protect the valleys from invaders, or call upon the mountain's shadows to shroud her people from harm. Her bond with the peaks was further symbolized by the veil of Elyrith, a flowing black mantle said to be woven with strands of moonlight and blessed by the spirits themselves. To her people, Elise was not merely a ruler, but a living bridge between the mortal world and the sacred, eternal presence of the mountains. It was said that she had a connection to the spirits of the peaks, a bond that brought blessings to her people. The crops thrived in the valleys, the livestock were robust, and the cold, while biting, was never deadly. Yet, Elise's reign was not without envy. To the east lay the domain of Lord Edric Malrin, a man driven by greed and ambition. Edric coveted Caldwin Hollow's resources and despised Elise's influence over her people. Unable to sway her through diplomacy or coercion, he devised a darker plan. Under the guise of a peace summit, he invited Elise and her council to a meeting atop the Blackspire summit, a place sacred to her lineage. On a bitter winter's night, Elise ascended the summit, her trusted advisors by her side. The air was heavy with the promise of snowfall, and the winds whispered warnings through the crags. But Elise, ever hopeful, believed in the sanctity of the summit and the honor of her rival's word. She was wrong. As she stepped onto the plateau, Edric's men emerged from the shadows, blades drawn and eyes filled with malice. Elise's council fought valiantly, but were no match for the ambush. Bound in iron chains and forced to kneel, Elise faced Edric, who gloated over his betrayal. "Your people will bow to me," he sneered, "and you, Lady Valamont, will be forgotten." Elise, though bloodied and bound, held his gaze. Her voice, though soft, carried a chilling power. "The mountains remember Edric, and so will the dead." With that, Edric ordered her thrown into the ravine. As she fell, her silver hair streamed behind her like a comet's tail, and her final words echoed through the peaks. "You will never rest, neither in this life nor the next." Weeks passed, and Edric claimed victory over Caldwin Hollow. He occupied Elyrith, his men pillaging its wealth and desecrating its sacred sites. But his triumph was short-lived. On the first night of the winter solstice, a storm swept through the hollow with an unnatural ferocity. The winds howled like tormented souls, carrying a low, mournful wail that seemed to echo from the very bones of the mountains. The villagers cowered in their homes, their windows rattling as if unseen hands were clawing to get in. Outside, the snow fell in erratic, spiraling patterns, and the sky seemed to pulse with flashes of cold, blue lightning. Some swore they saw shadows moving within the storm, tall, spectral figures that loomed just beyond the edges of sight. The air grew heavy, filled with the sharp tang of iron, as if the storm itself were bleeding. Children cried, and even the bravest among the villagers whispered prayers, their voices trembling as the wail grew louder, a harbinger of the terror that was about to unfold. The villagers whispered of shadows moving at the edges of their vision, and the air grew unnaturally cold. Edric's soldiers were the first to encounter her. Stationed in the ruins of Elise's manor, they awoke to find frost creeping across the walls and their torches extinguished by an unseen force. Then she appeared. Cloaked in darkness, her skeletal face half hidden by her hood, she stepped through the shattered doorway. Her hollow eyes burned with a spectral light, and her voice, when she spoke, was soft, yet commanding. "You have defiled this land," she said, "and now it shall claim you." One by one, the soldiers fell, their screams swallowed by the howling wind. By dawn, the manor was silent, its halls littered with frozen corpses arranged in grotesque parodies of prayer. News of the Lady of the Vale spread like wildfire. Those who had betrayed Elise or supported Edric's conquest became her primary targets. Some were found frozen in their homes, their faces locked in expressions of sheer terror. Others vanished entirely, their fates left to the imagination. Edric himself fled into the mountains, hoping to escape her wrath. But the lady's vengeance was relentless. Months later, a group of hunters discovered his body at the base of Blackspire Ravine, his face twisted in horror and his hands clutching his throat as though he had tried to claw something unseen from his neck. The hollow was abandoned, its surviving villagers scattering to distant lands. Yet, even in exile, they spoke of her. A spectral sentinel who walked the frozen peaks, her veil billowing in the wind, and her hollow eyes ever watchful. Over the years, many sought to unravel the mystery of the Lady of the Veil. A band of explorers once ventured into the hollow with a guide who claimed to know the safest paths to the ruins. They were found days later, their frozen bodies arranged in a line as if they had been trying to flee something unspeakable. A journal recovered from one of them described hearing a melodic, haunting voice calling their names, luring them deeper into the wilderness. Another tale spoke of a merchant who sought treasure in the ruins of Elyrith. He claimed to have seen the lady herself standing beneath the jagged arches of Blackspire Summit. "Her hollow eyes found me," he wrote in his final letter, "and in them I saw the end of all things." The merchant was discovered weeks later, his body inexplicably preserved within a block of ice near the ravine. These accounts only added to the chilling legend, ensuring that few dared to seek her out. Treasure hunters and scholars ventured into Caldwin Hollow, lured by tales of Elise's hidden wealth or the hope of breaking her curse. Few returned, and those who did carried stories that chilled the blood. One such tale came from Darian Carr, a renowned treasure hunter. His team had spent weeks exploring the ruins of Elyrith, guided by a map he claimed would lead to Elise's fabled treasure. On their final night, they camped near the remains of her manor. As the temperature plummeted, Darian's companions reported hearing whispers in the wind, calling their names. By morning, he was the only one left, his team's bodies frozen solid and arranged in a circle around the campfire. Darian himself returned to civilization a broken man, his hair turned white and his eyes hollow with fear. Another account came from a young scholar named Leora Venn, who sought the lady's wisdom. She claimed to have encountered the specter at the base of Blackspire Summit. The lady's voice, she said, was both beautiful and terrifying, her words cryptic yet profound. "The dead remember," the lady had told her, "but the living forget. Tell your kind to leave these peaks, or they will join the shadows." Marin, a descendant of Elise's council who sought to restore honor to her bloodline. Guided by fragments of ancient texts, Aveline crafted a ritual intended to free Elise's spirit and break her curse. On the winter solstice, Aveline ascended Blackspire Summit, carrying offerings of silver and blood. As she lit the ceremonial brazier, the air grew still, and the Lady of the Veil appeared. Her skeletal face glowed in the firelight, and her voice was tinged with sorrow. "Why have you come?" the lady asked. Aveline knelt. "To free you," she said, "and to atone for the sins of my ancestors." The lady's hollow eyes seemed to pierce Aveline's soul. For a moment, the world was silent. Then, with a gesture, the lady extinguished the brazier. "You cannot free me," she said. "This land is my tomb, and its betrayal my chains. But your offering is accepted. Leave now and do not return." To this day, Caldwin Hollow remains a place of desolation. The Lady of the Veil continues her eternal vigil, her figure often glimpsed on moonless nights, standing atop the ruins of Elise's manor, or wandering the icy trails of Blackspire Summit. Those who claim to have seen her speak of an overwhelming chill that seeps into their bones, as though the very air recoils from her presence. Her hollow eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, seem to fixate on intruders, stripping away their courage and filling them with an indescribable dread. Some have described hearing faint whispers, too distorted to understand, but filled with sorrow and malice. while others report the sensation of unseen hands brushing against their skin, urging them to flee. The path around the ruins becomes treacherous in her presence, with sudden gusts of icy wind and the sound of footsteps echoing where no one walks. Travelers who glimpse her rarely linger, for the foreboding weight of her gaze is enough to drive even the boldest hearts to retreat into the night. Her legend endures, a chilling reminder of the price of betrayal and the unyielding grip of vengeance. And in the howling winds that sweep through the peaks, her voice can still be heard, whispering, "The mountains remember, and so do I. Betrayers will find no rest. Their blood stains the snow, their names lost to the frost. Return if you dare, for I am watching, and the peaks are listening." Story 4. The Bonekeeper of the Dunes. A tale of eternal dread. In the desolate expanse of the ashen wastes, where the sun blazed mercilessly during the day and the cold gripped the land with icy claws at night, there existed a figure of haunting legend. She was known as the Bonekeeper, a specter of death and judgment whose skeletal visage and golden armor struck terror into the hearts of all who ventured too close. The Bonekeeper's story was whispered in hushed tones in faraway taverns and around flickering campfires. It was said she ruled over the desert's dead, collecting their remains and binding their souls to the sands. Travelers who disappeared in the wastes were often said to have met her judgment, their bones added to her macabre collection and their whispers carried forever on the wind. The origins of the Bonekeeper's curse lay in the ancient kingdom of Zarathun, a realm once known for its breathtaking beauty and unyielding power. Zarathun had thrived for centuries, its capital city rising like a jewel amidst the sands. At its helm was Queen Amara the Eternal, a ruler whose beauty was matched only by her ruthless ambition. Amara was obsessed with immortality. From a young age, she had watched the inevitability of time claim her loved ones. Her father, the great King Zarath, succumbed to a wasting illness, leaving her with a kingdom to rule and a crushing fear of mortality. Her mother's last words had been a plea to honor the gods, but Amara's heart hardened against such reverence. She believed that power, true, enduring power, lay not in worship, but in control. As she ascended the throne, Amara immersed herself in forbidden knowledge, seeking ancient tomes and relics that promised escape from the clutches of death. Each success, no matter how small, fed her obsession, and she began to see her fleeting mortality as a flaw to be eradicated, a barrier between her and eternal dominion. Over the years, her desperation grew, twisting her ambition into a relentless pursuit of the impossible. Her court's most trusted sorcerers warned her against the pursuit of such forbidden power, but Amara silenced them with gold, or the blade. Her thirst for eternal life led her to uncover the Tome of Binding, an ancient artifact said to hold the secret of defying death itself. Under a blood moon, Amara performed the ritual detailed in the tome. She sacrificed her most loyal warriors, spilling their blood upon the sands to bind her soul to the desert. The ritual succeeded, granting her a form of eternal existence. But the gods were enraged by her hubris. They cursed her and her kingdom. The once lush lands of Zarathun were consumed by unrelenting sandstorms. Its people turned to ash, and the golden city was swallowed by the wastes. Amara's immortal soul was trapped within a skeletal form, her cracked ivory robes and golden armor a twisted mockery of her former grandeur. At the center of the ashen wastes, a monument rose from the sands, the Sepulchre of Skulls. This towering structure, built entirely from the bones of those who had perished in the desert, was said to have materialized in the aftermath of Zarathun's destruction. Some believed the gods themselves raised it as a grim warning, a physical manifestation of their wrath. Others whispered that it was the work of Queen Amara, her final act of defiance as she bound her soul to the sands. The bones forming the sepulchre seemed unnaturally preserved, their surfaces etched with strange, glowing runes that pulsed faintly under the light of the moon. The winds that swept through its hollow chambers carried the whispers of the dead, a mournful dirge that could drive even the strongest minds to madness. The sepulchre stood not only as the Bonekeeper's throne, but as a gateway between the mortal realm and the domain of the Forsaken. The winds that swept through its hollow chambers carried the whispers of the dead, a mournful dirge that could drive even the strongest minds to madness. It was said that the Bonekeeper resided here, cradling the skulls of the Forsaken as she listened to their stories. Each skull held the memories of its former owner, their regrets and sins etched into the very marrow. The Bonekeeper's duty, decreed by the gods, was to guard these souls and ensure they never disturbed the living again. Yet her vengeance was far from passive. Those who trespassed into her domain were met with judgment, their fates sealed by her hollow gaze. The ashen wastes were a place of terror and mystery. Travelers spoke of phenomena that defied explanation. Shadows moving against the sun, footprints that appeared and vanished without reason, and sudden chills that cut through the scorching heat. The wind carried whispers, faint and distorted, as though the dead were trying to warn the living. As one ventured deeper into the wastes, the air grew heavier, and the boundaries of reality began to blur. Some reported seeing mirages of Zarathun's golden spires, only to find themselves surrounded by endless dunes. Others claimed to hear the Bonekeeper's voice, soft and melodic, calling their names and beckoning them toward their doom. Despite the fear she inspired, there were always those who sought the Bonekeeper. Some came for answers, others for treasure, and a few for redemption. None left unscarred. One such tale was that of Darien Thorn, a renowned treasure hunter who believed he could uncover the riches of Zarathun. Armed with maps and a team of skilled mercenaries, Darien ventured deep into the wastes. For days, they endured the searing heat and bitter cold, their resolve slowly eroded by the whispers and the sense of being watched. On the seventh night, the Bonekeeper appeared. Her cracked robes clung to her skeletal frame like ancient parchment, and her golden armor shimmered in the moonlight, tarnished with the passage of countless centuries. The intricate etchings on the armor seemed to move, alive with an otherworldly glow. Her face, a hollow skull adorned with faint traces of gilded filigree, turned slowly toward Darien, her empty eye sockets glowing with a pale, cold light. In her bony hands, she cradled a skull that pulsed faintly, as though it contained a heartbeat trapped in time. Darien felt his knees weaken as her hollow gaze locked onto him. The air grew impossibly cold, and the whispers that had plagued his journey rose into a deafening chorus, drowning out his thoughts. His breaths came in short, ragged gasps as he realized the skull she held bore faint, shifting images of screaming faces, souls that had been consumed by her judgment. Terror gripped his mind, and though he wanted to flee, his legs refused to move. The Bonekeeper's voice echoed across the sands, resonating in his very bones. "Why have you come, mortal?" she asked, her words as sharp as broken glass. "What treasure do you seek, and what price are you willing to pay?" Her hollow eyes locked onto Darien, and her voice echoed across the sands. "Why have you come, mortal?" she asked. "What treasure do you seek, and what price are you willing to pay?" Darien, driven by greed, demanded the location of Zarathun's wealth. The Bonekeeper extended the skull toward him, and when he touched it, visions consumed him. He saw the fall of Zarathun, the wrath of the gods, and the endless torment of its people. When the visions ended, Darien was alone. His team had vanished, and the sands around him began to shift. As he sank into the dunes, the Bonekeeper's whisper reached his ears. "Your greed has sealed your fate. Join the others in the silence." Another story told of Alira, a grieving widow who braved the wastes to beg the Bonekeeper for the return of her husband's remains. Elira's journey was fraught with peril. The desert's heat was unrelenting by day, and at night, the cold seeped into her bones. The whispers in the wind grew louder with each step, carrying fragments of voices, some pleading, others mocking her resolve. On the third night, a sudden sandstorm engulfed her, and she could swear she saw shadowy figures circling in the swirling chaos, their skeletal forms illuminated by flashes of lightning. As she pressed on, her provisions dwindled, and exhaustion clawed at her will. She stumbled upon a field of scattered bones half buried in the sand, each skull turned toward her as if watching her struggle. When she knelt to pray for guidance, she felt an icy breath on the back of her neck and turned to find a faint, glowing figure disappearing into the horizon. Fueled by desperation and love, Elira followed the whispers and spectral signs until she reached the Sepulchre of Skulls, its towering silhouette framed by the blood-red sunset. Her determination had brought her to the Bonekeeper's domain, but her trial was far from over. She carried a golden locket, a token of their love, and followed the whispers until she reached the Sepulchre of Skulls. The Bonekeeper appeared, her skeletal form framed by the spiraling monument. "Why do you disturb the dead?" she asked, her voice as cold as the night. "Please," Elira cried. "My husband's bones lie somewhere in this desert. Let me take them home." The Bonekeeper tilted her head, as if considering the plea. She extended a bony hand, and the locket floated into her grasp. For a moment, the whispers around the sepulchre grew louder, a cacophony of voices debating Elira's request. Finally, the Bonekeeper spoke. "Your love is pure, but the wastes claim all who enter. For your devotion, I grant this." She produced a shard of bone, faintly glowing. "Bury this in your homeland, and his spirit will find peace." Elira returned home and buried the shard. That night, she dreamed of her husband, his face serene for the first time since his death. The Bonekeeper's legend spread far and wide, her presence a chilling reminder of the price of hubris and the unyielding grip of death. Those who dared to challenge the ashen wastes often disappeared, their fates whispered among the dunes. The gods had decreed her eternal duty, but the Bonekeeper's vengeance was her own. To this day, the ashen wastes remain a place of desolation and dread. Travelers speak of seeing her figure silhouetted against the moonlit dunes, her golden armor gleaming like a beacon of death. One caravan leader, lost in the dunes, claimed to have seen her standing atop a distant ridge. He described the air growing deathly cold, his companions paralyzed by an unseen force. Another wanderer recounted hearing her melodic voice whisper warnings, only to see the shadows of skeletal hands clawing at his footprints. A merchant barely escaped after stumbling upon a field of scattered bones, each arranged in patterns resembling runes, as if warning him to turn back. These tales, shared in hushed tones, only deepened the Bonekeeper's legend, ensuring that none dared to challenge her domain without knowing the cost of failure. Her whispers, carried on the wind, are said to contain cryptic warnings. Turn back, for the sands are hungry. And in the deepest corners of the desert, where the Sepulchre of Skulls towers over the endless expanse, her voice can be heard. The sands remember, and so do I. The dead are mine to keep. Story 5. The Chained Gargoyle of Eldrin Keep, a tale of eternal torment. In the desolate, windswept hills of Eldrin, where jagged cliffs plunged into dark valleys and storms raged with unnatural fury, stood the crumbling remains of Eldrin Keep. Perched high atop its tallest spire, bound in chains that glowed faintly under moonlight, was a creature of unspeakable horror. Known as the Chained Gargoyle, it was more than a mere statue of stone. It was a being alive with fury, its fanged maw forever frozen in a snarl of rage, and its glowing eyes burning with a malice that defied centuries. The gargoyle's legend was whispered in fearful tones across the land. Some claimed it was a guardian cursed to suffer for eternity. Others swore it was a demon bound to the keep by dark sorcery. Whatever its origin, none could deny its haunting presence. Those who dared venture near the keep returned with tales of glowing eyes that pierced the darkness, a roar that shook the very ground, and a suffocating aura of dread that made their hearts race and their minds unravel. Centuries ago, Eldrin Keep was a fortress of unmatched splendor, its towering spires visible from miles away. It was the seat of power for the House of Valtryek, a noble family whose influence stretched across kingdoms. But their prosperity was built on fear, for the Valtryeks were practitioners of forbidden magic, their power sustained by pacts with dark forces. The last and most infamous of the Valtryek line was Lord Kyle Valtryek, a warlock whose ambition knew no bounds. Born under a blood moon, Kyle's arrival was marked by omens of turmoil. Storms ravaged the land, and livestock perished inexplicably. As a child, he displayed an unsettling fascination with the forbidden. While other boys played with wooden swords, Kale spent his days in the crypts beneath Eldrin Keep, poring over ancient runes etched into the walls. His mother, Lady Amara Valtryek, encouraged his studies, believing that his intelligence would solidify their family's legacy. She brought scholars and mystics from faraway lands to tutor him, but Kyle's insatiable curiosity drove him to question their teachings. Dissatisfied with the mundane explanations of life and death, he turned to the keep's hidden library, where he discovered the Codex Maleficarum, a forbidden tome sealed away for generations. By the time he ascended to lordship, Kyle had become an adept in dark sorcery, his knowledge surpassing even the most learned of his court. His obsession with power deepened after a failed assassination attempt by a rival family. Convinced that mortal defenses were insufficient to protect his legacy, Kyle vowed to seek a solution that would make Eldrin untouchable, a vow that would seal both his fate and that of the keep itself. As enemies closed in on Eldrin, Kale sought a way to protect his keep and secure his legacy. In secret, he began a ritual drawn from the Codex Maleficarum, an ancient tome that promised invincible protection, at a price. Using the blood of captured enemies and the souls of his loyal guards, Kale summoned a gargoyle, a creature of stone and shadow imbued with demonic strength. The gargoyle stood as an unyielding sentinel atop the battlements, its very presence striking terror into the hearts of invaders. For a time, the keep was safe, its enemies defeated by the creature's wrath. But Kale's greed demanded more. He sought to bind the gargoyle permanently to Eldrin, ensuring its loyalty for all eternity. He forged chains of enchanted iron, each link infused with spells of domination. The ritual, however, required a sacrifice of immense power, the lifeblood of the keep's people. Kale, blinded by his ambition, drained the life force of Eldrin's villagers to complete the spell. The ritual succeeded, but the cost was catastrophic. The land around Eldrin Keep withered, its fertile fields turning to dust overnight. Crops blackened as though scorched by invisible flames, and rivers that had sustained the villages shrank into trickling streams before vanishing entirely. A choking miasma hung over the region, sickening the villagers with a strange, wasting illness. Some claimed to hear the whispers of unseen figures in the barren fields, warning them to flee. Superstitions took root. Elders refused to speak of the curse aloud, fearing it would draw the gargoyle's wrath, and desperate families left offerings of bread and milk at the edges of the keep, hoping to appease the unseen force that had destroyed their lives. Those who stayed recounted visions of shadowy figures roaming the ruins at dusk, their hollow eyes gleaming faintly in the encroaching dark, as though the land itself had become a graveyard of restless souls. The gargoyle, now bound by the enchanted chains, roared in agony, its fury directed at both its master and the villagers who had betrayed it through their silence. On a stormy night, as lightning illuminated the keep, the villagers stormed the gates. They sought to destroy Kyle and free themselves from the curse. But Kyle, desperate and cornered, unleashed the gargoyle upon them. The creature's rage was unparalleled. It tore through the mob, its chains rattling like a death knell. Blood stained the stones of the keep, and the screams of the dying echoed through the halls. Yet, in the chaos, the gargoyle turned its wrath on Kale. It tore him apart with its claws, its glowing eyes blazing with hatred. With his dying breath, Kyle cursed the creature, ensuring it would never be free. The chains that bound it would hold forever, trapping it in a state of eternal torment. As the last of the Valtryk line perished, Eldrin Keep crumbled, its towers reduced to ruins. The gargoyle, now chained and immobile, became a prisoner of its own power. For generations, the chained gargoyle became the subject of ghost stories and fearful whispers. Travelers who ventured too close to the ruins spoke of eerie phenomena: unnatural cold that seeped into their bones, shadows that moved against the light, and a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. On stormy nights, the gargoyle's roar could be heard for miles, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. One such tale was that of Marcus Aaron, a scholar who sought to uncover the truth of the gargoyle's origins. Armed with ancient texts and talismans of protection, Marcus ascended the keep's crumbling staircases. As he approached the gargoyle, he described feeling an oppressive weight, as though the air itself rebelled against his presence. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto his, and a roar shook the stones beneath his feet. Marcus fled, abandoning his notes and swearing never to return. Another account came from Lenora Vance, a treasure hunter lured by the promise of Valtryk gold. She and her team entered the keep under the cover of darkness, their lanterns casting flickering shadows on the walls. When they reached the gargoyle, its chains began to rattle, and its eyes flared with an otherworldly light. One by one, Lenora's companions vanished, their screams swallowed by the darkness. Lenora barely escaped, her mind fractured by the encounter. The gargoyle's most terrifying attribute is its roar, a sound that defies description. Those who hear it speak of a deep, resonant bellow that seems to vibrate through their very bones. It is said that the roar can summon storms, lightning striking the keep's highest spire and illuminating the gargoyle's menacing silhouette. Some believe the gargoyle's rage is fueled by the souls trapped within its chains. The villagers, Kyle, and even the invaders who perished at Eldrin are said to be bound to the creature, their suffering adding to its fury. On nights when the storm clouds gather, the whispers of these souls can be heard, their cries mingling with the howling wind. Legends speak of a prophecy that foretells the gargoyle's release. According to the ancient texts, only one of pure heart and unyielding resolve can break the chains. To do so, they must ascend Eldrin Keep during the darkest storm, wield a blade forged from moonlight, and utter a prayer of absolution. But the cost of such an act is shrouded in mystery. Some fear that freeing the gargoyle would unleash its wrath upon the world, while others believe it would finally bring peace to the cursed lands. To this day, the chained gargoyle remains atop Eldrin Keep, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for something, or someone. Travelers who approach the keep often report an overwhelming sense of dread, as though unseen eyes are watching their every move. One such traveler, a hunter named Alden, claimed to feel an icy grip around his throat as he neared the gates, forcing him to turn back. Another tale spoke of a merchant caravan that camped near the keep on a dare. By morning, all that remained were their scattered wares and a faint, acrid smell in the air. A lone survivor, found wandering days later, muttered incoherently about chains tightening and glowing eyes in the dark. These stories have cemented the keep's reputation as a place of inescapable doom, where even the bravest are reduced to trembling shadows of themselves. On stormy nights, the gargoyle's roar can be heard, a sound of unending rage and sorrow that echoes through the valleys. And as the lightning illuminates its chained form, one cannot help but wonder, is the gargoyle a victim of its own curse, or a harbinger of greater horrors yet to come? In the deepest corners of the ruins, where shadows cling like cobwebs and the air grows thick with the weight of despair, the answer remains hidden, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to seek it. Story 6. The Shattered Empress of Thalovir. The ruins of Thalovir lay in the shadow of the mountains, shrouded by an unnatural mist that clung to the air like the remnants of an ancient curse. Once a city of unmatched splendor, it now stood as a graveyard of broken columns, decayed statues, and crumbling temples. At its center loomed a grotesque monument, a fractured effigy of a woman's face, her cracked features twisted in an expression of eternal anguish. Golden light poured from the statue's empty eyes, illuminating the ruins with an eerie, flickering glow. Emerging from her form were fragments of the city itself. Jagged towers, shattered pillars, and twisted arches fused with her likeness, as if the city's collapse had been drawn into her very being. This was the Shattered Empress, a being of insatiable rage and sorrow. Bound to the ruins of her once great kingdom, she existed as a fractured specter, her soul scattered and fragmented but still alive. Her whispers echoed through the desolation, carried by the wind to haunt the ears of any who dared to tread near. Her legend, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and eternal torment, was one that few could recount without trembling. Long before the city's fall, Thalovir was a jewel of civilization, its streets lined with majestic temples dedicated to a pantheon of gods, their spires reaching skyward as if to touch the heavens. Intricate mosaics adorned the walls of these sacred places, depicting stories of creation, heroism, and divine wrath. The markets were a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds, with traders from distant lands offering silks, spices, and gemstones, while musicians played melodies that echoed through the city's winding alleys. Festivals were a cornerstone of Thalovir's culture, with grand parades filling the streets and fire-lit ceremonies held in honor of the gods. The architecture of the city was unparalleled. Towering aqueducts brought water from the mountains, while bridges of marble arched gracefully over canals that shimmered under the sun. Under the reign of Queen Aelith, these wonders flourished, and the people lived in harmony, their lives steeped in traditions that celebrated both the divine and the mortal. Thalovir was not merely a city, it was a masterpiece, a living testament to human ingenuity and devotion. Aelith was beloved by her subjects, her wisdom and beauty celebrated in songs that echoed across the kingdom. With golden hair and piercing eyes that seemed to see into the hearts of her people, she was both a ruler and a symbol of hope. Aelith's devotion to the gods was absolute. She believed their blessings were the foundation of her city's prosperity, and she spared no effort in offering sacrifices and erecting monuments in their honor. But the gods, it seemed, had grown silent. The kingdom's golden age began to falter. Crops failed, storms ravaged the countryside, and sickness spread through the streets. The people, once loyal and adoring, grew restless, their faith in their queen waning. Desperate to restore her city and reclaim her people's trust, Aelith turned to a mysterious figure who arrived in Thalavir under the cover of night. Cloaked in shadows and speaking in a voice that seemed to echo from another world, he introduced himself as the Whisperer. His origins were a mystery, though rumors whispered of a being older than the gods themselves. Some claimed he was a fallen deity, cast out for sowing chaos among mortals, while others believed him to be a manifestation of despair, drawn to those teetering on the edge of ruin. The Whisperer fed on ambition and desperation, offering promises that always carried a sinister cost. His motives were never clear, but those who dealt with him spoke of an emptiness in his presence, as if the very essence of life was drained by his proximity. In Thalavir, his arrival marked the beginning of the city's darkest chapter, for he saw in Queen Aelith the perfect pawn to enact his will. The figure claimed to hold the knowledge to save Thalavir and ensure its prosperity for eternity. The cost, however, was one Aelith would not fully understand until it was too late. The Whisperer promised Aelith a ritual that would bind her soul to the city, making her its eternal guardian. By merging her essence with Thalavir, she could stave off its decay and preserve its glory forever. Eager to save her kingdom, Aelith agreed. She commanded the construction of a grand effigy, a statue that would serve as the vessel for her soul. Made of white marble and adorned with veins of gold, the effigy towered over the city, its beauty rivaling that of the queen herself. The ritual was performed under the light of a blood moon, its crimson glow casting eerie shadows across the assembled crowd. Aelith stood before her people, her voice steady as she declared her sacrifice for the good of Thalavir, though fear flickered briefly in her golden eyes. The air was heavy, charged with an unnatural energy, and the faint hum of the Whisperer's incantations sent shivers down the spines of those gathered. Some villagers knelt in reverence, tears streaming down their faces, while others averted their eyes, unable to watch as their beloved queen stepped willingly into the unknown. As the final words of the ritual were spoken, the ground trembled, and a piercing wail echoed through the city, as though the earth itself mourned her fate. The blood moon seemed to darken, its light dimming as Aelith's body began to disintegrate into golden ash, spiraling upward toward the effigy. Gasps of awe and horror rippled through the crowd as the statue's eyes ignited with an unholy glow, marking the moment her soul was bound forever to the city. The Whisperer began the incantations, and as the final words were spoken, Aelith's body disintegrated into golden ash, her soul pulled into the effigy. But the Whisperer had betrayed her. The ritual, twisted by his malice, did not grant eternal guardianship. Instead, it fractured Aelith's soul, scattering pieces of her consciousness across the city. The effigy, once a symbol of hope, became a grotesque monument to her suffering. Her golden eyes burned with an unholy light, and her whispers began to echo through the ruins, filled with rage and despair. The city, tethered to her agony, began to collapse. The earth split, buildings crumbled, and the people fled in terror. Thalavir had become a cursed wasteland. The ruins of Thalavir are now a place of desolation, shunned by even the most daring adventurers. Some speak of a merchant caravan that dared to camp near the outskirts of the city, lured by the promise of ancient treasures. By morning, the camp was found abandoned, their wares scattered and their footprints leading toward the effigy, only to vanish entirely. Another tale tells of a lone wanderer who staggered out of the mist days after entering the ruins. His eyes glowed faintly with a golden light, and he spoke in a voice that was not his own, repeating the same phrase. She sees you. She waits. He collapsed moments later, his body crumbling to ash. These accounts, though fragmented and cryptic, have added layers of fear and mystery to the Empress's legend, ensuring that Thalaver's name is spoken only in whispers. The air is heavy with a palpable sense of dread, and the ground seems to pulse with a faint, unnatural energy. Shadows move where there should be none, and faint whispers drift on the wind, their words unintelligible but filled with an overwhelming sense of sorrow. Those who venture too close to the effigy speak of horrifying visions. They see flashes of the city's destruction, hear the screams of its people, and feel the weight of Aelith's anguish pressing down on their souls. Some describe a strange compulsion to approach the effigy, as if drawn by an unseen force. Those who succumb are never seen again, their bodies absorbed into the ruins, their souls becoming part of the Empress's eternal torment. Many tales have emerged of those who dared to confront the shattered Empress. One such account is that of Arendor Grey, a mage who believed he could free Aelith's soul. Armed with ancient spells and talismans, he entered the ruins, determined to perform a ritual of purification. His final journal entry, found at the edge of the city, described his encounter. Her presence was overwhelming. The air grew thick, and the whispers became screams. Her golden eyes burned into my very soul, and I felt my resolve crumble. She spoke to me, her voice both melodic and terrifying. "You cannot undo what has been done. Leave or join the others in my eternal sorrow." I tried to resist, but the ground beneath me opened, and I saw faces, countless faces, screaming silently as they were swallowed by the earth. I fled, but I know her eyes will follow me until my dying breath. Another story tells of Lyra Thane, a grieving mother who entered the ruins to plead for the return of her child's soul. Lyra carried a golden locket as an offering, her hands trembling as she approached the effigy. The Empress appeared before her, her fractured face towering above the ruins. "Why do you disturb my slumber?" the Empress demanded, her voice resonating with sorrow and fury. "Please," Lyra sobbed, "return my daughter to me." The Empress reached out, her hand a twisted amalgamation of marble and bone. "The dead belong to me now," she said. "But for your love, I grant you this." The locket turned to ash, and in its place was a single golden feather. Lyra returned home and placed the feather on her daughter's grave. That night, she dreamed of her child, smiling and free from pain. The shattered Empress remains bound to Thalavir, her golden eyes ever watchful. On moonless nights, her whispers grow louder, weaving tales of betrayal and despair. Some say she waits for a savior, while others believe she craves vengeance against the gods who allowed her fall. Legends speak of a way to free her, a ritual requiring the heart of a willing sacrifice and the light of a dying star. The ritual, ancient and shrouded in mystery, is said to involve carving sacred symbols into the ground around the effigy, each mark imbued with the blood of the sacrifice. As the dying star's light aligns with the cracks of the statue, the heart must be placed upon an altar forged from obsidian and gold, lit by flames that never die. Success would supposedly shatter the curse, releasing her soul and returning her fractured essence to the divine plane. However, failure carries grave consequences. A rift between realms could open, unleashing horrors from beyond, or the Empress's rage could be magnified, turning her into an unstoppable force of vengeance. The weight of such stakes has kept many from attempting the ritual, leaving her fate suspended in eternal torment. But the risk is immense, for her freedom could unleash a wrath that would consume the world. To this day, Thalavir stands as a grim reminder of the cost of ambition and the fragility of the mortal soul. And in the cracks of her effigy, where gold glimmers and shadows writhe, the shattered Empress waits. her whispers promising both salvation and despair to those who dare to listen. Story 7. The Witch of Wormwood. A Tale of Eternal Dread. The villagers of Wormwood Hollow knew better than to venture into the forest that loomed at the edge of their lands. The twisted canopy of Wormwood Forest, with its gnarled branches and perpetual mist, served as a natural barrier and a warning. For within those cursed woods lived a being of unimaginable malevolence, known in whispers as Mother Hester. She was no mere mortal, but a figure of eldritch terror, her visage twisted by centuries of dark magic, and her soul bound to the forest's dark heart. With sunken eyes that glowed faintly and claw-like hands adorned with bone talismans, she was the embodiment of every childhood nightmare the villagers had ever whispered of. To cross into her domain was to invite doom, and yet her legend continued to lure the desperate and the foolish. Long before she became the terror of Wormwood, Mother Hester was a healer, a woman of gentle spirit and great wisdom. She lived on the outskirts of the forest, tending to the sick and delivering babies with her herbal remedies. The villagers revered her, calling her a blessing from the gods. But fate turned cruel. A strange sickness swept through Wormwood Hollow, claiming the lives of children and leaving families broken. When Hester's own daughter fell ill, her remedies failed her. Grief consumed her, and the villagers, desperate for someone to blame, turned on her. They accused her of witchcraft, claiming she had cursed the village to mask her own failures. Hester was cast into Wormwood Forest, her home burned, and her name forever cursed. The forest embraced her, its shadows wrapping around her like a mother comforting a child. There, in the depths of Wormwood, Hester found an ancient sentient power that promised vengeance and the strength to survive. But the price was her humanity. Consumed by rage and sorrow, she performed a ritual under a moonless sky, binding herself to the forest and transforming into a being of immense dark power. The villagers' cruelty had forged their doom, for Hester no longer sought their forgiveness, only their suffering. With Hester's transformation, Wormwood Forest itself began to change. The once vibrant woodland turned twisted and foreboding. The air grew thick and heavy, and a mist that never lifted began to crawl outward, devouring fields and creeping toward the village. Crops withered, livestock disappeared, and those who ventured too close to the forest were found days later, their bodies twisted and their faces frozen in expressions of unspeakable terror. The villagers soon realized that Wormwood was no longer just a forest, but a living, breathing entity, an extension of Mother Hester's will. She controlled its shadows, its roots, and its very air. At night, her cackling laughter would drift on the wind, accompanied by the faint sound of a rocking chair creaking deep within the woods. The villagers would bolt their doors and whisper prayers, but none could escape the creeping dread. Despite their fear, desperation drove some to seek out Mother Hester. Her reputation as a witch who could grant any wish, for a price, spread beyond Wormwood Hollow. Those who came to her often sought miracles, a cure for a dying child, wealth to escape poverty, or vengeance against an enemy. And Mother Hester delivered. But her bargains always carried a dark twist. One tale tells of Jonas Felch, a blacksmith whose wife lay dying of an incurable fever. Jonas entered Wormwood with an offering of silver and iron, materials he hoped would please the witch. He found her hut, a ramshackle dwelling covered in charms and totems made from bone and feathers. Hester greeted him with a toothless grin and promised to save his wife, but her price was his voice. Desperate, Jonas agreed. He returned home to find his wife miraculously healed, her fever gone. But when he opened his mouth to speak, no sound came. Over time, he discovered that his silence wasn't the only curse. Shadows clung to him like a second skin, and he began to hear whispers. Hester's laughter echoing in his mind until it drove him to madness. The stories of those who encountered Mother Hester are as numerous as they are chilling. Lila Crane, a merchant's daughter, ventured into Wormwood on a dare from her friends. She returned days later, her hair turned white and her eyes sunken. She would speak only in whispers, describing a woman who offered her unimaginable beauty in exchange for a secret too terrible to share. Lila's lips were found sewn shut with black thread the next morning, her body hanging from the branches of a tree at the edge of the forest. Another account tells of Captain Edrin Vance, a war hero who sought Hester's power to ensure victory against an invading army. He emerged from the forest carrying a sword wreathed in unnatural flames. His enemies fell before him, but his victories came at a cost. Each man he killed seemed to add to the shadows that followed him, their faces appearing in his dreams, screaming in endless torment. Unable to bear the weight of his deeds, Edrin vanished into Wormwood, his flaming sword later found rusted and broken near the forest's edge. Over the centuries, Mother Hester's legend has grown, her influence spreading like a poison through the surrounding lands. Villagers believe she's preparing for something, a final act of vengeance against the world that wronged her. The mist that clings to Wormwood has grown thicker, and strange figures have been seen moving within its shadows. Livestock are found mutilated, their bones arranged in patterns that no one dares to decipher. And always, there is the sound of her laughter, carried on the wind like a death knell. A group of villagers, led by the aging priest Father Aldrich, has resolved to confront the witch and end her reign of terror. Armed with relics of the old faith and wards blessed by the last remnants of the divine, they prepare to venture into Wormwood. But even as they steel themselves, the forest seems to respond, its shadows reaching ever closer to their homes and the mist seeping into their dreams. When the villagers finally entered Wormwood, they found themselves in a nightmare. The forest seemed alive, its roots twisting to block their paths and its shadows whispering taunts. One by one, they were separated, their screams swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Father Aldrich pressed on, clutching a sacred relic said to banish evil. He reached Mother Hester's hut, its windows glowing with an unnatural light. Inside, he found her waiting, her clawed hands resting on a staff of blackened wood. She smiled, revealing jagged, rotting teeth. "You think you can end me?" she hissed. "I am the forest, I am the shadows, and you are nothing." Aldrich raised the relic and began to chant, the light of the artifact burning brighter. Hester screamed, her form twisting and writhing as the power of the relic consumed her. But as her body crumbled to ash, her laughter echoed one last time. "You cannot destroy what you do not understand," she whispered. "I am eternal." Wormwood Forest remains, its mist thicker than ever and its shadows darker. The villagers who survived Father Aldrich's expedition speak of dreams haunted by Hester's laughter and visions of her eyes glowing in the darkness. Those who dared to approach the forest now find it more hostile than before, as if it is mourning its mistress or waiting for her return. Mother Hester's story is far from over. In the heart of Wormwood, where her hut once stood, a single gnarled tree now grows, its branches adorned with bone charms that rattle in the wind. And beneath its roots, a faint, raspy laugh can still be heard, promising vengeance to those who disturb her rest. Would you like additional refinements or further expansions on specific parts of this story? Story 8: The Phantom Express, a tale of eternal haunting. In the forsaken town of Ashen Ridge, nestled between jagged cliffs and shrouded in a perpetual mist, the ghostly wail of a train whistle has long haunted the townsfolk. The sound, chilling and mournful, echoes through the valley on moonless nights, heralding the arrival of the Phantom Express. This spectral locomotive, cloaked in an eerie green glow, is said to carry the souls of the damned, their skeletal faces pressed against fogged windows, eternally bound to an unknown destination. The legend of the Phantom Express is not merely a tale to frighten children. It is a curse that has lingered over Ashen Ridge for generations, shaping the lives and traditions of its people. The villagers, gripped by fear, devised rituals to protect themselves from the train's eerie influence. On the nights when the whistle is heard, families gather to burn sage and recite prayers passed down through generations, believing the smoke wards off the spectral locomotive. Superstitions govern daily life. No one dares leave their home after sunset, and the sound of distant chimes, believed to mimic the train's arrival, is considered an ill omen. Children are warned never to play near the old tracks, and offerings of coal and iron are left at the abandoned station in the hope of appeasing the cursed conductor. These traditions, born of terror, have become a somber part of Ashen Ridge's identity, a grim reminder of the price paid for their ancestors' hubris. The train's arrival is both a promise and a warning, a gateway for those desperate enough to seek its passage and a harbinger of doom for those who cross its path. The story begins decades ago when Ashen Ridge was a thriving mining town, its wealth built on the coal and precious metals extracted from the nearby mountains. The lifeblood of the town was the Midnight Express, a state-of-the-art locomotive designed to transport goods and passengers across the region. Its conductor, Edgar Blackthorne, was a man of unmatched devotion, revered for his punctuality and his almost mystical connection to the train. One stormy night, the Midnight Express carried a full load of coal, miners returning home after a long shift, and a handful of passengers seeking shelter from the tempest. As the train approached Shadow Gorge, the storm intensified. Lightning illuminated the jagged cliffs, and torrential rain hammered the bridge spanning the gorge. Despite warnings from the station master, Blackthorne refused to delay. The Midnight Express roared forward, its whistle piercing the howling winds. The bridge, weakened by years of neglect, could not withstand the strain. With a deafening crack, it collapsed, plunging the locomotive, its passengers, and its cargo into the abyss below. The river swallowed them whole, leaving behind only silence and a faint, acrid smell of burnt coal. In the days that followed, rescue efforts were futile. The bodies of the dead were never recovered, and the gorge became a place of mourning and fear. But soon, the whispers began. Locals claimed to hear the sound of a train barreling through the night, its whistle a mournful cry. Then came the sightings. A glowing locomotive, its windows filled with the faces of the lost, speeding along tracks that no longer existed. The Phantom Express had been born. The Phantom Express did not merely haunt the gorge. Its presence began to seep into the fabric of Ashen Ridge itself. Unnatural fogs would roll into the town on seemingly clear nights, blanketing the streets in an eerie silence broken only by the distant wail of the train's whistle. crops withered overnight, their leaves blackened as though burned by an invisible flame. Livestock refused to graze near the outskirts of town, their eyes wide with terror at sights unseen. And then there were the disappearances. People who ventured near Shadow Gorge were never seen again, their belongings later found charred or scattered along the abandoned tracks. Even the weather seemed to bow to the train's influence. Lightning storms with no rain would rage over the gorge, illuminating the jagged cliffs and casting fleeting shadows of skeletal figures in the mist. These phenomena became as much a part of Ashen Ridge as the train itself, a constant reminder of the curse that had claimed their town. The once thriving town fell into decline as the mines dried up and the railway was abandoned. The station, once bustling with life, became a decaying relic, its platform overgrown with weeds and its clock forever frozen at the hour of the Midnight Express's demise. The train's appearances grew more frequent and its legend darker. It was said that the Phantom Express sought new passengers, luring them with promises of escape, redemption, or forbidden knowledge. But those who boarded were never seen again, their fates whispered about in hushed tones. One of the earliest victims was Clara Pendleton, a young schoolteacher desperate to leave Ashen Ridge after the death of her fiancé. Witnesses claimed to see her standing on the abandoned platform, clutching a suitcase as the glowing train pulled in. She stepped aboard without hesitation, her figure silhouetted against the ghostly light. When the train vanished, so did Clara. The next morning, her suitcase was found on the platform, its contents untouched save for a charred train ticket. Over the decades, countless tales have emerged of those who encountered the Phantom Express, each adding new layers of terror to its legend. There was Jacob Hollis, a railway worker who disappeared after a late-night shift. His colleagues claimed he was last seen at the old station, staring transfixed at the glowing train as it pulled in. Days later, a section of track near Shadow Gorge was found warped and twisted, with Jacob's railway lantern embedded in the steel, still faintly glowing. Then there was Miriam Talbot, a seamstress whose dreams were plagued by the train's whistle. One night, she woke to find herself standing barefoot on the abandoned platform, the train looming before her. Witnesses swore they saw her board, but when they searched the station, all they found was her shawl, draped over the back of a bench. Even children were not spared the train's malevolent lure. Tommy Wells, a curious boy with a knack for exploring, vanished while playing near the tracks. His friends reported hearing the sound of a train approaching, though no tracks existed in the area. Months later, his toy train engine was discovered deep within the gorge, its paint chipped and its surface scorched, as if it had been pulled from the wreckage of the original crash. Each story adds another layer of terror to its legend. Harold Greaves, a drifter passing through Ashen Ridge, sought shelter from a storm in the old station. He claimed to see the train arrive, its skeletal conductor tipping his hat in silent invitation. Through the fogged windows, Harold saw passengers with grinning skulls and hollow eyes, their bony fingers tapping against the glass. He fled, but the memory haunted him until his death. His final words a warning: never board the train. Eleanor Gray, a grieving widow, ventured to the platform seeking reunion with her lost family. The train arrived, its doors creaking open to reveal a compartment bathed in pale green light. Eleanor stepped inside, her face a mixture of sorrow and hope. Days later, her house was found untouched, save for a faint scent of coal and a single burnt photograph of her family left on the mantel. Central to the legend of the Phantom Express is its conductor, Edgar Blackthorne. Once a proud and devoted railwayman, Blackthorne was known for his near-supernatural ability to navigate even the most treacherous conditions. Born into a family of railway workers, he grew up with the sound of train whistles in his ears and coal dust on his hands. To Edgar, the Midnight Express was more than a locomotive. It was a living entity, a machine with a soul he felt bound to protect. But his dedication came at a cost. Isolated and consumed by his work, Blackthorne had no family of his own and few friends outside the railway. This loneliness only deepened after the tragic loss of his brother in a mining accident, a grief he buried by immersing himself in the Midnight Express. On the night of the disaster, Edgar ignored warnings from the station master about the deteriorating bridge. Driven by an obsessive need to maintain his reputation for punctuality, he pushed forward, believing his skill and the power of the train would see them through. When the bridge gave way and the train plunged into Shadow Gorge, Edgar was the last to die, his hands still gripping the throttle as the locomotive was swallowed by the churning waters below. In those final moments, it is said he begged for a second chance, a way to undo his fatal mistake. Whether his plea was answered by a malevolent force or born from his own guilt, Edgar's soul became bound to the wreckage, transforming him into the spectral conductor of the Phantom Express. Now, Edgar Blackthorne roams the rails as a twisted figure of skeletal elegance, his tattered uniform and glowing eyes a haunting reminder of his failure. Though he claims to grant the desires of those who board his train, it is believed that every soul he collects fuels the locomotive's endless journey, trapping its passengers in an eternal cycle of torment. What drives him, whether it is guilt, vengeance, or a darker force, remains a mystery, but his chilling presence ensures that the legend of the Phantom Express endures. Some say he is bound to the train by guilt, his soul forever tied to the tragedy he caused. Others believe he has become something far darker, a collector of souls who feeds the train's insatiable hunger. Those who claim to have spoken to Blackthorne describe him as a figure of skeletal elegance, his once pristine uniform tattered and singed. He offers a simple choice: board the train, and your greatest desire will be granted. But know this, the price may be more than you are willing to pay. The bargains struck with Blackthorne are never as they seem. Marcus Flint, a gambler on the run from debt collectors, boarded the train seeking wealth and freedom. He returned to Ashenridge weeks later, his pockets filled with gold coins that burned his skin and his eyes hollow with madness. He spoke of endless tunnels and the cries of the damned before vanishing into Shadow Gorge, leaving behind only a trail of ash. The Phantom Express remains a haunting presence, its whistle a chilling reminder of the town's cursed past. To protect themselves, the villagers of Ashenridge have developed solemn rituals and traditions to ward off the train's malevolent influence. On nights when the ghostly whistle echoes through the valley, families gather around their hearths, lighting coal-filled lanterns believed to repel the spectral locomotive. Wreaths of iron and sage are hung on doors and windows to keep the train's curse at bay, while elders lead prayer vigils at the church, beseeching divine protection for the town. Children are taught to avoid the tracks at all costs, and every year on the anniversary of the Midnight Express's demise, the townsfolk gather at the old station for a somber ceremony, leaving offerings of black roses and iron nails as tokens of appeasement. These practices, born of fear and desperation, have become an indelible part of Ashenridge's identity, weaving the train's legend into the very fabric of their lives. On stormy nights, the train's glow can be seen winding through the hills, its spectral passengers peering out from the windows, searching for new souls to claim. The people of Ashenridge have learned to heed the warnings. On nights when the whistle blows, they bolt their doors and light candles, praying for the train to pass without stopping. But the temptation of the Phantom Express is eternal, and there are always those who cannot resist its call. As the train roars into the night, its skeletal conductor stands at the helm, his hollow gaze fixed on the horizon. The passengers whisper among themselves, their grinning faces pressed against the glass. And somewhere in the distance, a new soul waits on the platform, ready to board a journey from which they will never return. Would you like me to expand further or refine this tale? Story 9. The Harbinger of Dread. A tale of eternal terror. In the shadowed valley of Gravenhollow, a place forgotten by time and shrouded in perpetual gloom, there exists a terror that no villager dares to name aloud. The Harbinger, a skeletal figure cloaked in decay and dread, is said to appear on nights when the moon is hidden behind a veil of storm clouds. Its cracked, blood-streaked face and jagged grin strike fear into even the bravest of souls, while its glowing crimson eyes seem to pierce through flesh, exposing the darkest sins of those it gazes upon. The Harbinger is no mere specter or legend to frighten children. It is a force of vengeance and despair, birthed from betrayal and bound to Gravenhollow by a curse as ancient as the stones of the valley. Its presence is a promise of doom, an entity that does not merely take lives, but consumes the very essence of its victims, leaving nothing behind but whispers of their final screams. Centuries ago, Gravenhollow was a thriving village nestled at the edge of a fertile forest. The village was known for its vibrant culture, with festivals that celebrated the changing of the seasons, where villagers danced under lantern-lit trees and feasted on the bounty of the land. Their markets bustled with traders selling handcrafted goods, from intricately woven baskets to jewelry carved from rare stones found in the surrounding hills. Storytellers held gatherings by the great oak in the village square, weaving tales of heroism and the blessings of Aerolith, the Keeper of Light. The villagers' lives revolved around their faith, with weekly ceremonies held in the Grand Temple, whose golden spires were visible from every corner of the valley. Their songs and prayers echoed through the forest, creating a harmonious bond between the people and the land. This idyllic life seemed untouchable, a testament to their devotion and unity, until the famine struck and shattered the fragile peace they had taken for granted. The people worshipped Aerolith, the Keeper of Light, whose blessings ensured their prosperity. In the center of the village stood a magnificent temple, its golden spires reaching toward the heavens. The villagers' devotion was unwavering, and their lives were peaceful and abundant. But as time passed, prosperity gave way to greed. A particularly harsh winter struck, followed by a famine that left the villagers desperate and starving. Their prayers to Aerolith went unanswered, and their faith began to falter. It was during this time of despair that a stranger arrived in the village. Cloaked in shadows and exuding an aura of menace, he introduced himself as Zorak, an emissary of a forgotten god. He offered the villagers salvation, but at a terrible cost: the desecration of their temple. Driven by desperation, the villagers agreed, though their hearts were heavy with dread. Heated debates broke out in the village square, as some argued for faith and patience, while others insisted that survival outweighed loyalty to Aerolith. Mothers wept as they watched their children starve, and fathers cursed the heavens for their unanswered prayers. When the decision was made, it was not unanimous but born of collective despair. As they shattered the sacred altar, some villagers turned away, unable to bear the sight of their betrayal. Others burned the holy texts with trembling hands, their murmured apologies drowned out by the roar of the flames. The golden spires of the temple, once symbols of hope, toppled into ruin as the villagers razed the structure to the ground. In the eerie silence that followed, a heavy pall hung over Gravenhollow, as though the valley itself mourned what had been lost. For a time, Zorak's promise seemed fulfilled. The famine ended, and their fields began to flourish once more. But their betrayal had unleashed a force far darker than they could have imagined. From the ashes of the temple arose the Harbinger, a being forged from the villagers' guilt and Zorak's malice. Bound to the ruins of the desecrated altar, it became an eternal reminder of their sins. The Harbinger's presence seeped into every corner of Gravenhollow, transforming the once thriving village into a place of fear and despair. On the anniversary of the temple's destruction, the Harbinger emerges from the shadows to claim a soul. In the days leading up to this fateful night, the villagers prepare with grim determination. families gather to fortify their homes, nailing iron charms to doors and windows, believing the metal can repel the harbinger's approach. Elders lead the community in solemn rituals, burning bundles of sage and chanting ancient prayers passed down from their ancestors. The streets are lined with lanterns crafted from polished bone, their flickering light casting long, distorted shadows that seem to watch and wait. In the village square, a makeshift altar is erected, adorned with offerings of bread, salt, and coal. Symbolic tokens meant to appease the creature. Despite their efforts, an air of resignation hangs over Graven Hollow, for no amount of preparation has ever stopped the harbinger from claiming its victim. On the cursed night, the village falls into a tense silence. Every breath held as the first chilling scrape of bone against stone echoes through the valley. Its arrival is heralded by an unnatural stillness, as though the valley itself is holding its breath. The air grows cold, and an acrid stench fills the village. The sound of bones scraping against stone echoes through the streets, followed by a faint, sinister laughter that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. The chosen victim is marked days before the harbinger's arrival. They are plagued by nightmares of crimson eyes and skeletal hands, and whispers follow them wherever they go, reminding them of their deepest fears and regrets. On the fateful night, the harbinger drags its victim into the ruins of the old temple, their screams fading into the night. By morning, no trace of them remains, save for a charred outline on the ground where they were taken. Over the years, countless lives have been claimed by the harbinger, each story more chilling than the last. Eleanor Drayton, a young healer, was known for her kindness, but carried the guilt of having refused to treat a beggar who later died. On the night the harbinger came for her, villagers heard her sobbing and apologizing as she walked toward the ruins, compelled by unseen forces. By dawn, her garden, once lush with healing herbs, had withered into a barren patch of ash. Another tale is that of Nathan Cole, a woodsman who secretly cut down sacred trees from the forest to sell as timber. When the harbinger appeared, the sound of creaking wood echoed through the village, as if the forest itself was mourning. Nathan's body was never found, but the villagers discovered the stumps of the felled trees etched with claw marks that oozed sap like blood. Even entire families have fallen victim. The Hendersons, a reclusive household, disappeared one cursed night, leaving their home eerily untouched, except for a dining table set for 5, with seats pulled out as if the family had been invited to a macabre feast. In the center of the table lay a charred invitation bearing the harbinger's jagged grin. Elias Thorne, the village blacksmith, was the first. Known for his skill and kindness, Elias harbored a dark secret. Years earlier, he had poisoned his brother to inherit the forge. When the harbinger came for him, Elias was found kneeling in the village square, whispering, "It knows," before he was dragged away. The next morning, the forge was cold, and the anvil bore a single blood-red handprint. Margaret Holloway, the midwife, was another victim. She had abandoned an unwanted newborn in the forest to hide her affair with a married man. When the harbinger appeared at her door, the cries of an infant filled her house. The villagers found her home empty the next day, save for a cradle carved from bone and filled with ash. Even the innocent were not spared. Thomas Wren, an 8-year-old boy, vanished after wandering too close to the ruins. His mother discovered his favorite wooden toy near the altar, its surface blackened and splintered. The boy's laughter was heard echoing through the village for nights afterward, but he was never seen again. Legends speak of a forbidden ritual that can summon the harbinger, though the purpose of such an act remains unclear. The ritual requires a blood sacrifice and the recitation of an incantation in a language long forgotten. Those who attempt it are said to seek power or vengeance, but none who have summoned the harbinger have lived to tell the tale. Victor Crane, a disgraced priest, performed the ritual in a desperate bid for revenge against the villagers who exiled him. He carved the sigils into his flesh and spilled his blood on the ruins. The Harbinger came, its crimson eyes blazing with fury. Victor's screams echoed through the valley as the creature tore him apart, leaving his mutilated remains as a warning. One fateful year, a young woman named Lila Voss decided to confront the Harbinger. Burdened by the guilt of her ancestors' betrayal, she believed she could end the curse. Armed with a shard of the shattered altar and a talisman blessed by a wandering priest, she ventured into the ruins on the anniversary of the temple's destruction. The Harbinger emerged, its skeletal grin widening as it approached. Lila raised the talisman, chanting an incantation she had learned from the priest. For a moment, the creature paused, its eyes flickering as though caught between two worlds. But then it laughed, a sound that resonated through the valley like the tolling of a funeral bell. With a single swipe, it shattered the talisman and dragged Lila into the shadows. The villagers awoke to find the ruins ablaze, the flames casting long, flickering shadows that danced like specters. When the fire died, the altar was gone, replaced by a twisted sculpture of bone and ash. Lila's name was added to the long list of those claimed by the Harbinger, her fate a chilling reminder of the curse that bound Gravenhollow. To this day, the Harbinger remains a looming presence in Gravenhollow, its crimson eyes ever watching, its skeletal grin a reminder of the villagers' sins. Neighboring towns speak of Gravenhollow with a mixture of pity and dread, treating it as a cursed place best avoided. Travelers who pass near the valley claim to feel an unnatural chill, as though unseen eyes are watching them from the shadows. Rumors of the Harbinger have spread far and wide, inspiring tales of caution that warn against betrayal and greed. Some neighboring villages even hold their own rituals on moonless nights, lighting bonfires and reciting prayers to ensure the Harbinger's curse does not extend beyond the valley. Despite their fear, merchants and wanderers occasionally venture close, driven by curiosity or greed, only to return with harrowing accounts of distant laughter and glowing red eyes in the dark. The ruins are avoided, and the name of Zorak is never spoken. The villagers live in perpetual fear, their lives shaped by the shadow of the Harbinger. On moonless nights, when the wind howls through the valley, the villagers lock their doors and light candles, praying that the creature will not come for them. But the Harbinger's laughter is never far behind, a chilling promise that the sins of the past can never be escaped. Story 10. The Thorned Empress. A Tale of Eternal Terror. In the shadowed kingdom of Calvareth, where twilight reigns eternal and the air itself carries the weight of despair, a sinister legend haunts the land. The Thorned Empress, her skeletal visage crowned with a twisted diadem of living thorns, rules over a desolate empire of shadows. Draped in flowing black robes that shimmer like the void, her hollow eyes burn with a crimson light, a gaze that pierces the souls of all who dare to meet it. Her jagged grin promises only torment, her presence a harbinger of unending doom. Centuries ago, Calvareth was a flourishing empire, its cities gleaming with marble and gold, its fields abundant with life. Farmers rose with the first light of dawn, tending to vast fields of golden wheat and orchards heavy with fruit. Markets buzzed with activity, merchants calling out their wares, from exotic spices to intricately crafted jewelry. The people celebrated life with festivals under starlit skies, where music and laughter filled the air. The Empire's cities were marvels of architecture, their streets lined with statues of marble and fountains that sparkled in the sunlight. Children played in cobblestone courtyards, their laughter echoing through neighborhoods filled with the aroma of fresh bread and blooming flowers. Calvareth's people lived in harmony, their faith in their empress and the gods unshaken, their days brimming with hope and purpose. It was a kingdom that seemed destined for eternal prosperity, until the darkness began to creep in. At its heart stood Empress Velistra, a ruler of unmatched beauty and charisma. Her people adored her, and her court celebrated her as a symbol of prosperity and grace. Velistra's reign was marked by peace and progress, but as the years passed, an unsettling question began to arise. How had she remained so young, so perfect, while those around her withered with age? The truth was known only to Velistra and a select few in her inner circle. In her early years as empress, Velistra had sought the aid of Thyrex, a forgotten god of pain and sacrifice. Thyrex promised her eternal youth and power, but the price was steep. She would sustain her immortality by offering the blood of her people. Under the guise of religious devotion, Velistra ordered the construction of the Cathedral of Thorns, a towering edifice of black stone and living vines that drank the lifeblood of those sacrificed upon its altar. For decades, the Empress maintained her beauty and power, even as whispers of her dark pact began to spread. The people of Calvareth's devotion eventually turned to fear and resentment. The once beloved Empress became a figure of dread, her court a hollow shell of sycophants too afraid to challenge her. The land itself began to suffer. Crops withered, rivers dried, and the skies darkened as though the kingdom were rotting from within. The people's prayers to Thyrex went unanswered, their sacrifices feeding only Velistra's vanity. On the eve of the Thorned Eclipse, a celestial event that occurred once every 100 years, the people rose in rebellion. Armed with torches and steel, they stormed the Cathedral of Thorns, their chants of defiance echoing through the cursed halls. Velistra, desperate to maintain her power, invoked Thyrex in a final, desperate plea. The god answered, but not as she had hoped. As the blood-red moon reached its zenith, Velistra was bound to her throne of thorns, her flesh stripped away, her beauty twisted into a skeletal form, her crown fused with her skull, the living thorns writhing as though imbued with a will of their own. The rebellion was crushed not by her hand, but by the sheer horror of her transformation. As the blood-red moon reached its zenith, the cathedral was bathed in an otherworldly crimson glow. Velistra's agonized screams echoed through the stone halls, merging with the ghastly sounds of flesh tearing and bones cracking as her form twisted into something inhuman. The rebels, once filled with righteous fury, froze in place as they witnessed their empress's face collapse into a skeletal grin, her crown of thorns fusing with her skull and writhing like living serpents. Some dropped their weapons and fled, their minds broken by the sight, while others fell to their knees, trembling as an overwhelming dread rooted them to the spot. The air became thick and suffocating, filled with the scent of blood and decay, and the very walls of the cathedral seemed to pulse with the dark energy of the ritual. As Velistra rose from her throne, her crimson eyes burning with malice, she extended a skeletal hand, and the thorns of the cathedral came to life, ensnaring those who dared defy her. Their screams faded into the night as the once proud rebellion crumbled under the weight of their terror. The rebels fled, leaving behind a kingdom forever cursed. Velistra's transformation marked the beginning of Calvareth's eternal twilight. From the moment her skeletal form ascended the throne, the land began to wither under the weight of her curse. The fertile fields, once lush with golden crops, turned to ash, their barren soil incapable of sustaining life. Rivers that once flowed crystal clear became stagnant and black, their waters poisoned as though touched by the very essence of despair. The skies darkened, clouds perpetually swirling with hues of gray and crimson, casting an eerie pall over the kingdom. The people of Calvareth suffered as the curse spread to every corner. Villages fell into ruin, their inhabitants driven mad by whispers carried on the wind, the voices of the countless souls bound to the Cathedral of Thorns. Children were born frail and sickly, their eyes reflecting the blood-red light of the eternal eclipse. Animals refused to graze, their instincts warning them of the unnatural decay that had consumed the land. Even the architecture of the kingdom began to warp. Once proud castles and town halls crumbled, their walls overtaken by thorny vines that pulsed with a life of their own. The thorns seemed to grow overnight, their razor-sharp tips glistening with droplets of blood as if feeding on the suffering of those nearby. The very air became thick with dread, each breath a reminder of the Empress's dominion. Calvareth, once a beacon of prosperity, became a land forsaken by hope. Its people lived in fear of the thorned Empress, their lives reduced to shadows of what they had once been. The curse was not merely a punishment, but a suffocating presence, a reminder of the kingdom's betrayal and the price of Vilistra's vanity. The once thriving cities crumbled, their ruins swallowed by thorny vines that spread from the cathedral like a plague. The land became a barren wasteland, its skies perpetually shrouded in gray. The thorned Empress ruled from the Cathedral of Thorns, her voice a chilling echo that carried on the wind. Those who ventured too close to the cathedral spoke of hearing whispers, their deepest fears and regrets laid bare by an unseen force. Legends say that the Empress's gaze can strip the soul from a body, leaving behind only a husk. Her skeletal hands, adorned with rings of blackened gold, are said to weave the thorns into grotesque shapes. Spires, cages, and even spectral guardians that patrol her domain. The Empress's rule is not one of governance, but of dread, her presence a reminder of the price of vanity and betrayal. Encounters with the Empress. Over the centuries, many have sought to challenge the Thorned Empress, though none have succeeded. One such story tells of Cedric Wren, a former priest who believed he could use holy relics to purify the cathedral. Cedric carried a blessed chalice and ventured into the thorn spire under the light of a waning moon. Witnesses claimed they saw faint golden light emanating from the cathedral that night, but it was extinguished by dawn. When searchers dared to enter, they found the chalice shattered and Cedric's robes wrapped around a skeleton entangled in thorns, as though he had been consumed by the cathedral itself. Another tale speaks of Daphne Elric, a mercenary who sought fortune and glory. She armed herself with weapons forged from meteorite iron and entered the cathedral with a team of skilled warriors. For hours, the villagers waited, hearing echoes of distant clashes and blood-curdling screams. By morning, the only sign of Daphne's team was a single gauntlet hanging from the cathedral's gates, dripping with crimson sap. A more recent account involves Oliver Crane, a scholar who claimed to have deciphered a ritual to bind the Empress's power. Armed with nothing but ancient scrolls and his own determination, he disappeared into the Thornspire. Days later, his journal was found near the entrance, its pages filled with increasingly erratic scribbles. The final entry read, "Her eyes burn through my soul. She knows she's always known." The journal was drenched in a strange, viscous fluid that no one dared to touch. One such tale is that of Gregor Hale, a knight from a distant kingdom who believed he could end the curse. Armed with a blade forged from celestial steel and blessed by priests, Gregor entered the Cathedral of Thorns. He was never seen again, but his screams echoed through the valley for days. When the cathedral was later searched by daring adventurers, they found only his armor, twisted and entwined in vines, his sword shattered at the foot of the Empress's throne. Another story tells of Elise Marrow, a scholar who sought forbidden knowledge within the cathedral's halls. She hoped to understand the nature of the curse and perhaps undo it. Elise's journal, discovered years later, detailed her descent into madness as the whispers of the cathedral grew louder. Her final entry spoke of a figure with glowing eyes and a grin that spanned eternity. The journal ended abruptly, the pages stained with blood. The Cathedral of Thorns, now a ruinous monument to Valistra's vanity, is a place of unspeakable horror. Its walls pulse with a sickly, rhythmic vibration, as though the structure itself were alive and breathing. The air within is thick and oppressive, carrying the scent of decayed flesh and iron. Echoes of faint, mournful whispers seem to emanate from the very stones, voices of the damned eternally bound to the Empress's will. The cathedral's interior is a labyrinth of shifting hallways and chambers, each more grotesque than the last. Thorn-covered vines snake across the floors and walls, dripping with a dark, viscous fluid that stains anything it touches. The arches above are jagged and uneven, their forms twisting unnaturally as if shaped by some malevolent force. Chandeliers made of human bones hang from the ceilings, their flickering lights casting warped shadows that seem to move of their own accord. Every step deeper into the cathedral reveals new horrors. Rooms filled with skeletal remains arranged in ritualistic patterns, altars adorned with rotting offerings, and mirrors that reflect not the viewer, but scenes of their greatest fears. The deeper one ventures, the louder the whispers grow, transforming into anguished wails and screams that seem to claw at the edges of the mind. It is said that time itself becomes distorted within the cathedral, moments stretching into eternity or collapsing into a fleeting instant, leaving intruders disoriented and vulnerable. At the heart of the cathedral lies the Heart of Thorns, a chamber where the walls seem to close in, pulsating with a crimson light that bathes the room in an unsettling glow. The ground is littered with the remains of those who dared to approach, their bones entwined with the ever-growing vines. It is a place where despair takes physical form, and hope is a fleeting memory, swallowed by the insatiable hunger of the Empress's curse. Its walls are alive, pulsating as though they have a heartbeat, and its spires reach skyward like skeletal fingers clawing at the heavens. The thorns that encase the cathedral are said to drink the blood of those who venture too close, their tips glistening with crimson droplets. Deep within the cathedral lies the Heart of Thorns, a relic said to contain the essence of Valistra's power. It is believed that destroying this artifact would end her reign, but no one has ever reached it. The relic is guarded by spectral knights, their forms shrouded in shadow and their weapons forged from thorny vines. The air around the Heart of Thorns is thick with a palpable sense of despair, as though the very walls mourn the lives lost within. One fateful night, a group of exiles known as the Ashen Blades ventured into Calvareth, armed with ancient texts and relics believed to counter the Empress's power. Among them was Serena Vale, a descendant of one of the original rebels who had stormed the cathedral centuries earlier. Driven by guilt and a desire to end the curse, Serena led the group into the heart of the Thornspire. The journey was fraught with peril. The group faced spectral guardians, shifting hallways, and the maddening whispers of the damned. One by one, they fell, their screams swallowed by the cathedral's living walls. Serena, the last to reach the Heart of Thorns, raised her blade and struck at the relic. For a brief moment, the cathedral trembled, its thorns retracting as though in pain. But the Empress appeared, her skeletal form cloaked in shadows, her grin widening as she raised a hand. The thorn sprang to life, piercing Serena's body and binding her to the cathedral's walls. Her final scream echoed through Calvareth, a haunting melody that marked the failure of yet another attempt to end the Empress's reign. The Thorned Empress remains an eternal presence in Calvareth, her skeletal form a chilling reminder of the kingdom's sins. Travelers speak of seeing her wandering the wasteland, her crown of thorns glinting in the pale twilight. Some claim to hear her laughter on the wind, a sound that chills the soul. On nights of the thorned eclipse, when the blood-red moon casts its light over the land, the Empress's power reaches its zenith. The cathedral glows with an eerie crimson light, and the whispers of the damned grow louder, calling out to any who dare to listen. It is said that on these nights, the Empress chooses a new victim, their soul added to the countless others bound to the Cathedral of Thorns. And so, the legend of the Thorned Empress endures, a tale of vanity, betrayal, and unending torment. Those who hear it are left with a single chilling thought. Some curses can never be broken, and some sins are too great to be forgiven.